Hello, and welcome to your Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Services Rochester Area Podcast. My name is Jan Heineman. Thanks for listening today. I'm going to be reading to you today from the Rochester Beacon. Our first story from the Rochester Beacon comes from writer Smriti Jacob and is dated July 22nd. South Korean tech firm picks Parenton as U.S. headquarters. AI and cloud-native company Megazone Cloud has chosen Parenton as its U.S. headquarters, committing to create up to 122 jobs over 5 years. The South Korean company is scaling its presence in California and New York. The company will be based at Willowbrook Office Park. It will receive up to $1.22 million in tax credits from the Empire State Development. In Monroe County and Greater Rochester Enterprise are also assisting with this project. The cost of updating the facility has been placed at $625,000, officials say. Bob Moore, Megazone Cloud CEO of U.S. Operations, says, "Establishing our U.S. headquarters in Monroe County is a pivotal milestone in Megazone Cloud's global growth strategy. By deepening our investment in New York, we are perfectly positioned to help enterprises scale using next-generation AI and cloud-native solutions." Bob Moore is also former CEO of Eagle Dream Technologies and former Chief Information Officer of Paytech. "As an RIT graduate," he says, "I know firsthand the world-class caliber of tech talent in the Greater Rochester area, and we look forward to tapping into that local brilliance to fuel our North American expansion." Megazone Cloud is a global cloud-managed services provider, a Google Cloud partner, and the largest premier AWS consulting partner in the Asia-Pacific region. The company's decision to expand operations and establish its U.S. headquarters in upstate New York is further proof that New York continues to attract the world's most cutting-edge companies. That's from Governor Kathy Hochul. Megazone Cloud hopes to use local tech talent by hiring from local universities. The company currently maintains a strong partnership with Rochester Institute of Technology, using the school's co-op program for software and data engineers, officials say. Matt Hurlbut, GRE President and CEO, says, "Megazone Cloud leaders are growing in Greater Rochester, New York, leveraging their technology experience and capitalizing on the region's deep technical talent, particularly RIT graduates, who understand complex technology and how to apply it in business environments." Launched in 1998, the company began as a web agency and hosting services business. In 2006, it restructured its organization, creating 3 divisions: digital marketing, digital agency, and platform services. Its cloud division was established in 2018, and 2024, the company became AI native. Megazone Cloud operates subsidiaries in Korea, North America, Japan, Southeast Asia, and Oceania. This story from the Rochester Beacon comes from writer and managing editor Smriti Jacob, and you're listening to readings from the Rochester Beacon on your Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service. Our next story from the Rochester Beacon comes from writer Rob Bell and is dated July 23rd, Voices of the 19th Ward. Josie McClary found 2 dogs while walking her own near School 16. They were barely a few months old, left out in the cold and rain that clung to Rochester in early May, 2 or 3 pounds tops. You could see their ribs, every bone showing through. My heart just went out for them, she says. McClary scooped them up and brought them to the shelter. They got the works, shots, treatment, everything they needed. A month later, she brought them home for good. Oh my goodness, I tell you, it felt like I got newborn kids in the house, she says. Another morning, John and Joanne DeMott were getting ready for a tradition that's been part of Genesee Street for a quarter century. 50 kids and their chaperones, hands in the dirt, planting flowers in more than 60 concrete planters. Local businesses pitch in with food, turning it into a neighborhood event. John DeMott says, the whole idea is that the kids get excited about knowing that they have beautified the neighborhood where they go to school. The street looks beautiful. Elsewhere in the neighborhood, Flynn Claiborne John was once walking home from a corner store when they heard neighbors singing karaoke from a nearby roof. I would sing back at them and they'd sing back at me, Claiborne John says. It was a very cute little interaction. You won't find these moments in a crime report or a real estate listing, but they are the ethos of one of Rochester's most unique and examined communities, the 19th Ward. This article, the second in a series on the 19th Ward, is part of the Rochester Beacon's From the Ground Up project. This community stretches from West Avenue down to Scottsville Road, with Genesee Street on one side and the Erie Canal on the other. It sits just across the river from the University of Rochester, mixing quiet residential blocks with busy stretches like Thurston Road, July Avenue, and Genesee Street. The neighborhood began as an early river settlement, sometimes called the Rapids or Castletown. It later developed into a streetcar suburb filled with American Foursquare, Colonial Revival, and other houses from the early 20th century, and it became Rochester's 19th Ward in 1902. Today, the 19th Ward is known for its mix of old houses, its diversity, racial, economic, and otherwise, and its spot close to some of Rochester's biggest institutions. But those same things have also made it a place where outsiders sometimes project their fears. McClary, a former president of the 19th Ward Community Association, who has lived in the neighborhood for nearly 29 years, believes news coverage has cast a black cloud over the area. Everybody wants a story, she says. But at the end of the day, make sure your facts are facts, and make sure that you're not blaming, shaming, and putting that black cloud over an entity or a neighborhood. John DeMott sees a similar pattern in television news. You know, you watch the evening news, and how many times did they flash up a picture of a police car and a street sign? And that's your impression of the city. No one here pretends the 19th Ward is without its challenges. Neighbors often point to speeding traffic, unsafe street crossings, and long-neglected infrastructure. Concerns made painfully clear after 6-year-old Ryan R.J. Grantham Jr. was struck and killed near Thurston Road and Sawyer Street in June 2023. Neighbors turned their grief into action, gathering thousands of petition signatures and pressing the city for safer crossings and traffic calming measures. In November 2023, the city added a 12-stripe crosswalk at the intersection and installed a green bench in RJ's memory. However, residents will also tell you that tragedy is not the whole story. Too often, the headlines drown out the people who repair the homes, organize block parties, support local businesses, fight for safer streets, and quietly look out for the family next door. The real question isn't whether the 19th Ward has challenges, it's what someone gets back when they choose to live there, challenges and all. A neighborhood transformed. Rochester's black population grew substantially during the Great Migration, the movement of black Southerners into northern and western cities during much of the 20th century. From 1940 to 1970, Rochester's black population grew by about 300%. Some came seeking industrial or agricultural work. Many encountered a city where housing restrictions confined black residents largely to the 3rd and 7th wards. Overcrowding, urban renewal, discriminatory real estate practices, and government-backed segregation helped create the conditions that preceded Rochester's 1964 uprising. Historical records include restrictive racial covenants that explicitly barred black people and members of other ethnic groups from purchasing certain properties. When black families began moving into the predominantly white 19th Ward, some real estate agents used block busting to frighten white homeowners into selling quickly and cheaply. The DeMotts saw it happen. John DeMott moved to Rochester from Elmira in 1964 to study electrical engineering at Rochester Institute of Technology when its campus was still downtown. Joanne DeMott was raised on Rochester's east side. Each lived in the 19th Ward before they married. John DeMott remembers real estate agents sending postcards to homeowners after a black family bought a house nearby. We literally watched white flight unfold in front of our eyes, with people putting their houses for sale and blockbusting with realtors, he says. The postcards would identify a recent buyer with what DeMott describes as an African American name, and then offer to sell neighboring homes quickly. The fear was profitable. DeMott says, "We thought we were getting a bad shake from the real estate industry. They were profiting from the hysteria, the fear." Some residents refused to participate. They placed small signs in their windows bearing 2 words, "I'm staying." The message, DeMott says, was direct. "I'm not leaving. You're not going to frighten me out of my neighborhood. I'm going to look forward to meeting new people." The 19th Ward Community Association was established in 1965 to fight blockbusting and redlining while building a neighborhood that was diverse by race, age, and class. It remains one of the country's oldest neighborhood associations. But integration on paper did not automatically create relationships between people. McClary says, "When I first moved here, I felt that it was a lot of isolation. You had your white people, and then you had your black people, and they didn't mix." She began inserting herself into conversations about what the neighborhood needed. "It wasn't easy," she says, "but I broke down some barriers." Decades after the Great Migration helped reshape Rochester, Claiborne John made a much smaller migration of their own. They grew up in the Baltimore, Maryland area and moved to Rochester about 6 years ago to study software engineering at RIT. They had not visited the city before enrolling. The move was partly an act of independence. Claiborne John grew up in a large family, sometimes with about 8 people in the house. "I just wanted to be alone," they say, and I got it, and I decided I didn't like it. Their introduction to Rochester was hardly romantic. College applications had been completed virtually during the COVID-19 pandemic, and the process did not feel entirely real. At first, Claiborne Judd did not expect to remain in Rochester. I felt like the mayor didn't really care about the city, they say. Their conclusion was blunt. You gotta take care of the people better. RIT did not give Claiborne Judd community either. They described it as an environment that fostered institutional relationships that were more transactional than personal, in their opinion. After living on campus for a while, Claiborne Judd left school and found a 4-bedroom house through Facebook Marketplace that they would eventually share with roommates. It was affordable and located in the 19th Ward. Who owns the neighborhood? The 19th Ward remains a competitive housing market in the city of Rochester. Over the spring months, homes here were selling for a median price of around $170,000, which is $5,000 higher than the city average. According to Redfin, most houses spent just 13 days on the market before finding a buyer, and many went for more than the asking price. That demand does not surprise DeMott. A house goes up for sale and it doesn't stay, he says. He believes part of the neighborhood's stability comes from its range of incomes and occupations. We have folks who are on public assistance, DeMott says, and at the other end of the spectrum, we have people in the 6-figure category: university professors, doctors, attorneys, professionals, teachers, administrators. Joanne DeMott also sees younger families with children are moving in. That turnover raises questions about whether a new generation, folks like Claiborne Judd, will join the neighborhood's traditions or simply occupy its houses. Claiborne Judd has adoration for the neighborhood. They can walk to corner stores, Caribbean and halal restaurants, and bike to nearby bars in Genesee Valley Park across the river. However, tribulations seem too close for comfort at times. A roommate owned a Hyundai Elantra during the period when certain Hyundai and Kia models were frequently targeted for theft because they lacked engine immobilizers. The trend spread nationally through social media demonstrations showing how some models could be started with simple tools. The car thieves were dubbed the Kia Boys in the media. Claiborne Judd says, "My neighbors, without knowing me, left their houses in their free time to come to my house, to knock on my door and tell me what was going on. I thought it was awesome." Some might have called it nosy, maybe even a little intrusive. Claiborne Judd saw something else: people paying attention. The work that does not become news. McClary's work in the 19th Ward has often begun with what she notices while walking. "I love talking to neighbors," she says. "That's how you get to know people, and how you get to know what some of the challenges are in the area." On evening walks, she noticed dark stretches where porch lights were not working. Around the same period, she received information about home burglaries near Arnett Boulevard and Thurston Road. She asked residents why their lights were off. Some needed new bulbs. Others had fixtures that were not working. Sometimes a bulb is the last thing you think about, because if your lights are on in the house, you don't think about the outside, she says. But that's public safety. McClary took action. She contacted Rochester Gas and Electric, which provided 100 LED bulbs. She began canvassing the area and giving bulbs to residents through a campaign called Find the Light. It's the kind of simple fix that can get lost in bigger debates about crime and policing. For McClary, public safety means more than just police. It's about having a grocery store nearby, a pharmacy, slowing down cars, and making sure an older neighbor can cross Chilai Avenue to get to Tops. Public safety is much broader than law enforcement, she says. The same goes for the neighborhood's economy. Residents regularly say that they want coffee shops, bakeries, sit-down restaurants, and other neighborhood amenities. John DeMott has heard those requests during decades of meetings and revitalization efforts. He and Joanne have also watched businesses matching those descriptions struggle. They can't survive unless we're out there supporting them, Joanne DeMott says. We've seen a lot close. She says residents must help the businesses that remain. We just want to make sure that those who are there stay there because we do need the services that they provide. McClary approaches the issue through the lens of financial wellness. She helped establish a collaborative of community organizations, the 19th Ward Collaborative, that focused on home ownership, repairs, financial education, and the Thurston Road Business Corridor. She says, you can't just have businesses come to the Thurston Road Corridor if people financially cannot support those businesses. We can want whatever we want there, but are we financially in the position to support them? A lower barrier to care. Claiborne John's car once broke down near a corner store in the 19th Ward. A man came out of the store and told them about someone down the street who repaired cars. He called the mechanic, who arrived on a bicycle. They moved the car and spent the rest of the day working on it. Neither man had been obligated to become involved. In broader society, Claiborne John says, the response to another person's difficulty can be, you're going through a problem and I don't really care. In the 19th Ward, it's my personal business, but also they care about it for some reason. Claiborne John does not claim that the neighborhood is free of stressors. Their own car mirror was damaged. Parking is frustrating. They keep their windows closed, as they believe anyone living in a city should. Still, they say, I'm not worried for my physical safety. What they've found is a place where people step in before things get out of hand. A person does not have to be shot or harassed before someone asks whether they're all right, Claiborne John says. It feels more like they just care for their neighbor. The kind of place people choose to stay. John and Joanne DeMott met through a Catholic support group for divorced adults at St. Monica Church. They have now been married for 47 years and have lived in the same 6-bedroom house on Genesee Park Boulevard for just as long. Together, they raised 7 children. The house checked all the boxes, big enough for a family, sure, but it also had what draws so many people to the 19th Ward: natural wood, a fireplace, big rooms, and enough character to picture a whole life unfolding inside. It was just a good place to raise a family, Joanne DeMott says. The family could walk to stores, schools, the post office, and Genesee Valley Park. Their children attended different schools, all within the neighborhood. Over the decades, the DeMotts became part of the civic machinery around them, the community association, business groups, university partnerships, house tours, public safety discussions, and annual events. The flower planting along Genesee Street brings the story back to St. Monica, as the church served as the headquarters for the network of churches, schools, children, and businesses that sustained the flower planting project. Stories in the 19th Ward have a way of circling back on themselves. The dogs McClary adopted were found near Dr. David and Ruth B. Anderson's school, number 16. Years earlier, residents organized when the Rochester City School District considered permanently closing the school. Their advocacy helped secure an agreement to renovate and reopen the building. The 19th Ward Community Association described it as one of the neighborhood's major collective victories. The headlines about the 19th Ward come and go, but the connective tissue and fabric of the community seem to persist in every story told. The doors are closed physically, but not emotionally, Claiborne John says, and that does so much more for me than anything else. They once expected to leave Rochester and still want to travel, but the city no longer feels temporary. I do think this is my home, Claiborne John says, and I think I see myself staying here long term. Part of the reason is the 19th Ward. I can feel alone in my bedroom when I'm resetting myself, they say, but I know for a fact every weekend or so my neighbor's going to grill and I can sit in my backyard and talk to him over the fence. When the wider world becomes isolating, Claiborne John says, that kind of connection matters. It's a large chunk of why I haven't left, they say. This story from the Rochester Beacon comes from contributing writer and former Democrat Chronicle reporter, photographer, and editor Rob Bell. He also produces and hosts Plants and Beats, a podcast exploring mindfulness, music, and culture. And you're listening to readings from the Rochester Beacon on your Niagara Frontier radio reading service. Our next story from the Beacon comes from writer Jacob Schermerhorn and is dated July 23rd. Rochester bans large overnight gatherings under a new curfew. At a public safety press conference Thursday, that would have been the 23rd, July 23rd, Rochester Mayor Malik Evans announced new curfew rules aimed at curbing violence tied to large late-night gatherings. On July 4th at 10:30 p.m., the rockets' red glare were done bursting in the air, said Evans. Those fireworks were over. We were done. The 8 shootings that happened didn't happen on July 4th. They happened on July 5th at almost 1 a.m. because we had individuals who thought that they could turn our public sidewalks into their own personal party. He said the problem isn't limited to the July 5th incident. Videos posted online show chaos after clubs close at around 1:30 a.m. People have brawled as late as 2:30 a.m. or 3 a.m., he said, requiring a response from the police department. Evans said that behavior has to end. City leaders said the push for a curfew is connected to the recent downtown fight, but the measure was prompted by other incidents this year. It adds to the mayor's gun violence state of emergency, making public gatherings of 10 or more people illegal between 11 p.m. and 5 a.m. Rochester Police Department Chief David Smith said that such groups would be given a warning by officers. If they don't comply, they could be arrested for disobeying an emergency order, a Class B misdemeanor. Exceptions to this curfew include groups protected under First Amendment rights who are protesting or demonstrating, those with city permits for an event, or groups out for reasons connected to their employment. According to RPD data, so far this year, 28% of crimes involving a firearm, knife, or physical force have occurred between the hours targeted by the new curfew. This is about 30% across all available years from 2011 to 26. The rule applies to all ages, a pivot from earlier in the month when Evans raised the possibility of a curfew for young people. Subsequent discussions and a review of disruption data expanded the curfew's scope. Patrick Beath, Corporation Counsel, says, when we took a look at who's the victims and perpetrators in these crimes involving large groups of people overnight, we saw that it wasn't just juveniles, it's people of all ages. I had young people come up to me and say, "Mayor, you're singling out young people, but it's not just us." This from Mayor Evans. He goes on, "We made the curfew all ages because this is not confined to one group. The issue is not with an age group, it's with the behavior of taking over public areas and creating a party-like atmosphere without a permit and way after hours." There was a youth-based curfew in Rochester from 2006 to 2009. However, the Court of Appeals ruled it unconstitutional in its final year. Evans said this curfew, which is not based on age, will pass legal muster. A quasi-curfew model already exists in the East End Entertainment District. First rolled out in 2024 under the gun violence state of emergency, it created a special zone within the area that bars people under 21 and closes roads on Saturday nights. Like the gun violence state of emergency, that zone has been continually renewed and remains in place. This story from the Rochester Beacon comes from contributing writer and data journalist Jacob Schermerhorn, and you're listening to readings from the Rochester Beacon on your Niagara Frontier radio reading service. Our next story from the Rochester Beacon comes from writer David Wazana and is dated July 27th. High Court ruling adds uncertainty, local experts say. In Rochester, immigrant advocacy and refugee service organizations say the recent U.S. Supreme Court decision on temporary protected status has added to a broader uncertainty around the Trump administration's immigration policies. In late June, the court decided that the Trump administration could end temporary protection status for Syrian and Haitian immigrants, exposing refugees fleeing unstable home countries to deportation. The court ruled that the federal law establishing the TPS program generally bars courts from reviewing the determinations by then Secretary of Homeland Security Kristi Noem to end the TPS designations for Haiti and Syria. The statute states that there is, quote, no judicial review of any determination with respect to the designation or termination or extension of a designation of a foreign state under this subsection, unquote. The TPS program offers temporary protection from deportation for legal residents who are nationals of countries dealing with high crime, natural disasters, war, or other forms of strife that make returning to their country of origin unsafe. Countries are listed on the TPS list for periods of 6 to 18 months, by the Department of Homeland Security, pending review and potential extensions of their TPS status. Despite having the ability to extend a country's TPS designation beyond the initial 6 to 18 months, Kristi Noem revoked TPS for every country up for review during her time in office. Noem was fired by President Donald Trump in March. Even before the ruling, policy changes and surges in enforcement made options for refugees harder to navigate. Grant Marthinson, chairperson of Refugees Helping Refugees, who spoke with the Beacon before the Supreme Court ruling on the June 25th, said, "We don't know what the status of clients is going to be from week to week," which, of course, makes it hard to help them navigate the bureaucracy and, plan for their lives here. That kind of sword of Damocles is hanging over folks and just makes it harder for them to get stuff done, he adds. The case involved a November 2025 decision by Noem revoking TPS status for Haitian and Syrian refugees. It was followed by orders from the U.S. District Court judges in Washington and New York, halting deportations of Haitian and Syrian refugees, respectively. The orders, which went into effect November 2025 for Syrians and February 26 for Haitians, prompted an emergency appeal from DHS, which was granted by the Supreme Court. Elizabeth Lindholm, a Buffalo-based immigration attorney with Harder, Seacrest, and Emery, says, "Before, during, and after the TPS case, we've had a big influx of employers trying to get a handle on what options are there for folks in TPS status, and trying to say, okay, it looks like they're terminating these programs. This is a really critical employee. What can we do? Sometimes I have answers," she says. "Sometimes I don't." She says employers look to the U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Services for information on compliance with regulations for hiring migrant workers, including those residing under TPS. Lindholm describes how employers are updated. Every Friday, USCIS is posting a new blog post saying the work authorization for employees in this category expires on next Friday. And every Friday, at some time in the middle of the day, they say it expires next Friday. What this means from a practical standpoint for employees and employers is they have to expect that they're going to lose their job every Friday. Employers are expecting they're going to have to terminate somebody every Friday. It's just this microcosm of that uncertainty which is baked into this, while everyone is trying so hard to follow the rules, and literally every week the rules keep changing. Marthinson says some 90-day resettlement organizations have had to close their doors due to loss of funding from the Office of Refugee Resettlement. Typically, resettlement organizations receive funding from ORR, Office of Refugee Resettlement, to assist refugees during their first 3 months in the United States. Organizations with more diverse sources of funding, like RHR, have been able to weather the storm, but are now dealing with an influx of clients from organizations that have had to reduce operations due to Trump administration funding cuts. RHR describes itself as a refugee services organization and provides assistance to refugees after their initial 90-day resettlement, with resources from a more diverse array of funders. ORR funding cuts and large caseloads have exacerbated the uncertainty over rapidly changing immigration policy. Marthason says, "We're not talking about closing, but can you pay for everybody's position without ORR or private support from someone else? Maybe not." So, yeah, the uncertainty is certainly difficult for continued operations, even though there's fewer organizations doing the work already. Syria was listed under TPS beginning in March 2012, when the country descended into a 14-year civil war in the aftermath of the Arab Spring. Haiti was given TPS status in August 2024 in the midst of gang violence that had engulfed the country. Though the situation in Syria has largely stabilized since the fall of the Assad regime in December 2024, conditions are still dangerous. Meanwhile, the Haitian crisis is ongoing, with thousands reported dead or missing. According to statistics compiled by the New York Office of Temporary and Disability Assistance in 2025, Monroe County is among the top 3 resettlement counties for refugees and special immigration visas holders. In fiscal year 2025, 750 settled here. The 2 largest source countries for those migrants are Syria and Afghanistan. Afghanistan, which has a large refugee community in Rochester, is among more than a dozen other countries expected to be impacted by the Supreme Court's ruling on TPS. For refugees fleeing dangerous situations in their home countries, the TPS program offered an avenue to stay in the country without fear of deportation while pursuing a path to legal residency. Lindholm says, "It's kind of served as a catch-all safety net. I can see the argument it's been overused, but to cut the net without lowering a ladder is kind of creating more problems than solutions from a human perspective." Many of the Afghan migrants are SIV holders, special immigration visa holders. These visas were issued to those who assisted the U.S. in the 20-year war in Afghanistan. For these Afghans, viewed by the ruling Taliban government as collaborators with the American occupation, returning to their home country could have deadly consequences. Programs assisting Afghan immigrants hoping to settle in the U.S. with SI visas, like the Biden-era Operation Allies Welcome and its continuation program called Operation Enduring Welcome, saw major cuts by the Trump administration last year. Marthason says, "Sending people back to Haiti, Syria, or Afghanistan is just unconscionable. America ought to live up to its commitments, particularly when it comes to the Afghans that served as translators for the military. The idea that you send these people back is embarrassing if you're supposedly a patriot." In the meantime, Marthason and refugee advocates recommend working with local immigrants to support them. Get involved in issues around migration, whether that's donating or volunteering to any of the groups left doing this work, he says. There are folks that are scared to go outside. You don't need to wait for someone to tell you to do it. You can find people and help them. This article from the Rochester Beacon comes from contributing writer David Wazana. And the writer mentioned reaching out to help some of these Rochester refugee services organizations. Here's one of them that you can contact if you're interested in helping. Rochester Refugee Resettlement Services can be found online at Rochester Refugee Services, all one word, .org. That's rochesterrefugeeservices.org. Give them a try and see how you can help. That's my editorial comment, not from the Rochester Beacon. And you've been listening to readings from the Rochester Beacon on your Niagara Frontier radio reading service. And you still are listening to readings from the Rochester Beacon. Here's another one. Our next story from the Rochester Beacon is a letter to the editor, a guest opinion, coming from Ina Hughes. And Ina Hughes, MD, is an associate professor of neurology and pediatrics at Golisano Children's Hospital. She was appointed interim chief of child neurology in 2025. Ina Hughes writes in to the Beacon on July 28th, when a child needs neurology care, fear is not the whole story. In child neurology, there's a moment when a parent's face changes. They have just heard that their child may be having seizures, or that something may be affecting the brain, and suddenly an appointment becomes a fear about the future. Parents imagine what a diagnosis could mean for independence, friendships, school, and family life before they understand what is known, what remains uncertain, and what kinds of care and support may be available. This is not a rare experience in Rochester. At Golisano Children's Hospital, the Division of Child Neurology serves nearly 13,000 patients each year from across upstate New York. Some children come with seizures or headaches. Others come with movement concerns, muscle weakness, developmental questions, immune-related neurologic conditions, or rare genetic disorders. But a referral to child neurology does not always mean the worst. All concerns are evaluated step by step, often beginning with pediatricians who know what to watch for and when a specialist should become involved. Some symptoms turn out to be common or manageable. Others require a closer look. Part of our work is helping families understand what is routine, what is uncertain, and what may be more complicated. Child neurology has a wealth of tools to help make those distinctions. We begin by listening carefully to what families have noticed about a child's symptoms, development, and daily life. A neurologic examination, imaging, genetic testing, EEG monitoring, blood work, developmental assessment, and ongoing follow-up can then help us better understand what's happening. When we know something may be serious, or when the answer is not yet clear, specialized child neurology care becomes especially important. The goal is not only to treat a condition, but to help a child and family live as fully as possible. For one family, that may mean learning what to do if a seizure happens at school. For another, it may mean finding a medication plan that helps a child sleep through the night and feel more like themselves during the day. For another, it may mean understanding why a child tires easily, struggles with movement, or needs support that teachers and classmates cannot always see. Families also need help with ordinary questions that become urgent when a child has a neurologic condition. What is safe? What should school know? When should we worry? How do we help our child keep learning, growing, and belonging? A diagnosis can be an important turning point, but for many families, the medical plan becomes real in daily life. A diagnosis gives a name to symptoms a family has been watching for months or years. It can point toward treatment, therapy, school supports, genetic counseling, or what to watch for next. A diagnosis can help them to identify a community for guidance, support, and sharing of goals. But a diagnosis is a beginning, not an ending. Child neurology is rarely limited to one appointment or decision. A child's condition is lived out over time, often in places far from the exam room. At school, at home, with friends, in sports and activities, and later in the push toward independence. Good care has to follow the child into those settings, not simply name the condition and stop there. That is why pediatric neurology is team-based. A child's care may involve a physician adjusting medication, a neuropsychologist helping a family understand learning needs, a dietitian supporting dietary therapy for epilepsy, or a surgeon evaluating whether a procedure could help. Others may need coordination across school, therapy, genetics, and developmental services. Rochester has a long history of leadership in neurology, clinical research, and care for rare neurological diseases. At University of Rochester Medicine, child neurology works closely with neurosurgery, developmental and behavioral pediatrics, behavioral health, genetics, and other specialties to support children whose needs do not fit neatly into one category. That kind of collaboration matters because families rarely experience a child's condition in isolated pieces. They experience it as part of daily life. The field is also changing rapidly. Research in rare diseases, neurogenetics, epilepsy, and gene-targeted therapies is opening new possibilities for diagnosis and treatment, especially for conditions where earlier recognition can change what options are available. These advances are promising, but they also make public understanding, research participation, and community support more important. Families who participate in research help expand what we know about common and rare neurologic conditions and contribute to better diagnostic and treatment options for children in the future. But participation in research is only one way families and communities move this work forward. Advocacy, education, philanthropy, and broader public understanding all help support the mission of helping children with neurologic conditions live as fully as possible. That engagement matters because child neurology does not happen only inside the clinic. It depends on families who share what they are seeing, pediatricians who know when to refer, schools that understand a child's needs, researchers who ask better questions, and communities willing to support children whose challenges are not always visible. A neurologic diagnosis should never define the whole of a child's life. With the right diagnosis, support, treatment, and understanding, many children continue to learn, play, build friendships, and live lives marked not only by medical complexity, but by joy, growth, and possibility. For families, the first referral to child neurology may begin with fear. Our responsibility as a community is to help ensure it does not end there. This letter to the editor of the Rochester Beacon came from Inna Hughes, MD, who's an associate professor of neurology and pediatrics at Golisano Children's Hospital. She was appointed interim chief of child neurology in 2025. And you're listening to readings from the Rochester Beacon on your Niagara Frontier radio reading service. Our next story from the Rochester Beacon is dated July 28th and comes from writer Danik Sudakov. Charter schools receive music education grants. 10 public charter schools in Rochester received $165,000 in grants from Sound Foundations of Rochester to enrich their music programs. The grants aim to strengthen Rochester's long history in music education. Sound Foundations is a nonprofit organization that invests in music education in public charter schools. Melinda Goldberg, Sound Foundation's executive director, says, "We know music education has a profound impact on children's academic performance and social emotional learning. Funding will be used to expand music programs, including hiring and retaining music teachers, purchasing or renting equipment, upgrading music room technology, supporting school musical performances, and expanding opportunities for students to learn and create music. The current expansion brings Sound Foundation's total investment in education to nearly $250,000 over 2 years. The 2026 to 27 grant recipients are Academy of Health Sciences, Eugenia Maria de Hostos Charter School, Genesee Charter Schools, Innova Girls Academy, Renaissance Academy, Rochester Academy Elementary School, Rochester Prep Elementary and Middle Schools, University Preparatory Charter School for Young Men, Virtus High School, and Young Women's College Prep. Several of those schools are located in the city's economically disadvantaged neighborhoods. Sound Foundations noted that Rochester has one of the highest child poverty rates in the state and receives the lowest charter school basic tuition funding. The organization points to a 2022 study showing that in Rochester there's a 42% charter funding deficit, representing a gap of $14,280 per student. Goldberg says, "We want charter school students to have access to the same enrichment opportunities as their peers who attend district schools, because every child deserves the opportunity to participate in music programs." Julie Losi, CEO at Virtus High School, agrees. These investments make it possible to provide innovative, high-quality enrichment opportunities that would otherwise be beyond our financial reach, ensuring our students have access to experiences and pathways that prepare them for success in college, careers, and life, she says. Sound Foundation's grant was supported in collaboration with the Rochester Area Community Foundation and Arts Bloom, which were funded through the City of Rochester's Percent for the Arts program. Grant applications for the 2027-28 school year will open later this year for Rochester-based charter schools. Sound Foundations encourages all schools to apply. This story from the Rochester Beacon comes from writer Danik Sudakov, who's a student at Rochester Institute of Technology and a member of the Oasis Project's third internship cohort. And you have been listening to readings from the Rochester Beacon on your Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Services Rochester Area Podcast. My name is Jan Heineman. Thanks for listening today, and hope you come back and listen again in the future.